We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey & Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Epic. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.
Hello, I'm Paul Fanlund, editor and publisher of the Capital Times, and I'd like to welcome you to Cap Times Idea Fest. This is the festival's 5th year and features both live and virtual sessions. Our theme is Reckoning with Change, and there has certainly been a lot of that. Staging Idea Fest is always a big lift, and we couldn't do it without our generous sponsors and Cap Times members. If you're not already, I hope you'll consider becoming a member. Members help shape events like this one and support an independent local media organization at a critical time. Find details online at membership.captimes.com. You'll find other festival videos and information at captimesideafest.com. I'd like to thank the Burrish Group at UBS, which once more is the presenting sponsor of Idea Fest, as well as our many other sponsors. This session explores what steps Madison needs to take now and in years to come to actually close the achievement gap between white students and students of color. It features an outstanding panel of experts. It is sponsored by the Madison Community Foundation, whose support for us and immersion in such an important local issue is very much appreciated. So please enjoy the conversation.
Hi there, I'm Scott Gerard, and I'm the Cap Times K-12 education reporter. School is back in session, and while staff, students, and families continue to navigate the challenges that COVID-19 brings, the conversation is also beginning to turn to what's next. There have been plenty of lessons from the past year and a half of education, and applying them to the problems that existed long before the pandemic, as well as those the pandemic created or intensified, is the next key step. Today, we've gathered a great panel of education experts to discuss the overarching challenge that Madison education has faced for a long time, the achievement gap. How can we close it by 2030? Let me introduce you to the group of panelists who we hope can help us find an answer. First, we have Camera Stovall. The son of 2 Madison Metropolitan School District teachers, Camera has been an elementary school teacher in Madison for over 20 years. He taught at Emerson, Leopold, Lapham, and Van Hise before moving to Alice over 10 years ago. Next is Angie Hicks. A Madison native, Hicks started her current role in the school district this year after serving for 10 years as the principal at Wright Middle School and earning a doctoral degree. Prior to that, she was an administrator and a teacher at other district schools. We also have Kaleem Kher. Kher is the founder and CEO of One City Schools, a growing Madison charter school that primarily serves children of color. Prior to starting One City, Kher was the head of the Urban League of Greater Madison and the chair of the National Urban League's Education Committee. Finally, we have Gloria Ladson-Billings, the former Kellner Family Distinguished Chair of Urban Education in the University School of Education. Ladson-Billings is the current president of the National Academy of Education and former president of the American Educational Research Association. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a fellow of the American Educational Research Association. Thank you all so much for being here to talk about this subject.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get to the questions. And Gloria, I'll start with you. What is the achievement gap, and should we even call it that?
Well, I'm someone who thinks language matters. We're in an era where you would be chastised if you called an adult black man boy, or if you called an adult woman girl. And so we want to make sure we're calling something what it is. And for me, achievement gap connotes the notion that somehow the children, the students, aren't doing their part. Sometimes we extend it to say, well, it's their parents. In some instances, we say teachers. What I'm suggesting is that rather than an achievement gap, we have an education debt that has accumulated from before the founding of the nation, where you literally did not allow black people to be educated. And so now here we are in 2021 thinking, oh, well, why haven't they, quote, caught up? I spoke to a group this morning and I shared with them that in 1833, Alabama instituted a literacy law that essentially said anybody who taught an enslaved person or a black person to read, write, and spell could be fined $250. $1833 is the equivalent of 7,600 today dollars. So there's always been this attempt to keep black people from learning. The other reason that I don't think calling it a gap is appropriate is because it's disingenuous. It doesn't take into consideration other so-called gaps. We have wealth gaps. We have health gaps. We have housing gaps. So all of these things, these disparities really kind of roll downhill into what I've called debt. And the education debt is one of the more serious of those debts.
Other panelists, what do you think of the term education debt compared to achievement gap?
Well, I agree with, I want to call you Dr. Billings because out of respect, and so I'm struggling right there for a moment, but I agree with what she said because it is a debt. But I also think within those, the wealth, the education, the housing, it's also an opportunity. There are also opportunity gaps, and so that also needs to be a part of that because a lot of black and brown folks have not had opportunities that are equitable to their white counterparts wherever they are. So I think opportunity gap would be a nice little piece to put in there as well.
You know, for me, it's, you know, there's certainly a gap between students, academic performance outcomes, but it's what's driving that. And too often we get caught up in just talking about the gap, and we don't really look holistically at what's starting that, like what's driving it. Lack of access to economic opportunity by parents. Lack of access to experiential opportunities by young people. I remember being a student at West High School, and they would have these annual trips for students, and they would do ski trips and all these different things, and there was no way we could afford for me to go to those types of opportunities. Students would come back, they would have formalized more of their relationships, they were talking a new language, and I was sitting on the outside of that. And so, you know, what we really need to do is equalize the advantage that young people have by making sure that more of our young people are able to participate in being kids, like having opportunities as children that are going to help them expand their minds about what they're good at and also what's possible. And then ensuring that their parents are seen by those children as a resource, meaning they're not struggling so hard all the time. And second, that those parents can provide resources to their children, which diminishes stress among families, et cetera. So there's a lot more that goes into that than just calling it a gap. And when we say that, people want to overdose the kids with reading, when that's usually not the only thing that they need.
Well, I agree with Dr. Billings that this started way back in enslavement days. But if we want to talk about it more recent times, when everybody's talking about the Brown versus the Board of Education in 1955 and how much that helped black people. But I like to look at the opposite. I like to look at how much it took from us as far as the black teachers I'm referring to. A lot of our teachers at the time were highly educated. And when that law passed, we lost about half of our teachers. And these teachers were doctors and master's degrees and administrators at the time. And when the passage of that law, a lot of the white teachers came and replaced them. and then they had to go do elsewhere. And then we're stuck with our children, right? So our children are being taught by people that are less educated. They're also taught by people that don't culturally, they're not culturally responsive with the children's needs. And we all know that this, that law passed in 1955, but it took 20 years for it to all the way fully go into fruition, which is a problem within itself. And then, but that takes us to the 70s, where this quote unquote achievement gap that they've been really talking about it and it being apparent. And this conversation I've been hearing my whole entire life, being born in the 70s. So I do understand that it's something that it's a disturbing conversation, and especially if we've been having it for the last 50 years. It's a conversation that needs to be fixed. And I've never thought about it as an achievement gap. So I'm glad that Dr. Billings, enlightened us with the true term of what it should be considered.
Thank you all very much for speaking to that. So, Kamra, as a classroom teacher, 4K now, what do these disparities look like? The gaps and opportunities, that depth in education, what does it look like in a classroom?
Okay, well, I guess it really depends on where you're teaching in Madison. So when I taught at Lapham and Van Hise, I didn't notice this quote unquote gap because it wasn't there. And and the difference is, like at Van Hise, you had one school bus for the whole school and everybody else walked to school, right? And now I'm at Frank Ellis, where we have, 5 or 6 school buses, right? And most of the people are bused in. So I'm able to see these deficiencies a little bit clearer when it comes to the students and what we provide them, as a city. So I think it was like 1985, somewhere around there, where Dr. Harris strongly convinced the district to do something about the Rimrock neighborhood school. Not the school that's not in the Rimrock neighborhood, I'm sorry. And the way the district's situation, the way the district did it was they bused our children to Frank Ellis, which is, it's about a 40-minute bus ride each way. So when I first got there, that was one of the first things that I noticed that just it wasn't clicking to me, and I didn't understand it. And then when I researched it, these families have been doing this. This is a third generation of families from the Rimrock neighborhood that have been bused back and forth to Buckeye Road. And, just think about it. I mean, like, if you were riding the bus 40 minutes to school and 40 minutes home, as opposed to walking, what could you do? What type of reading could happen during that time? What type of educational things could happen during that time? Because it's hard to read a bus on these crowded school buses, right? So then we get to the school, and I'm teaching 3rd grade at Frank Ellis, and sometimes I'll have a group of kiddos that I'm teaching 5th grade material to, and at the same time I'm teaching 1st grade material at the same time. So I've become an expert at differentiating, and that's one of the things that you have to do at these schools. I call them minority schools, and that's just one thing that we have to do, because we have this quote unquote gap that is coming, and it's coming before they get to the school, right? We have these I like to call them literacy deserts, and we have these pockets in our city that we don't have libraries. The kids don't have access to literacy types of things. I'm a 4K teacher, 3K4 teacher for a reason, because I know how important the literacy is for that age group. And if our kids come in not speaking the language that we need them to, or if they come in 1,500 words less than their peers, than their counterparts, we have a quote unquote gap at 4K, right? So when we come in, we have some children that don't know any letters, haven't been exposed to any letters, books have not been read to them for an assortment amount of reasons. But I think one of the main reasons that we don't supply books to their neighborhoods, we don't have literacy, we don't have buses that come and with libraries, and the city really hasn't invested in these neighborhoods that these literacy deserts are in. And by the time they come to us, there's already a quote unquote gap, right? And it's not just a literacy, it's math literacy as well, right? Because if kids have to know money and directionality before, after, all of these words come in, and without them knowing these words, we're already behind the ball. So We just need to focus a little bit more and care on and love our children a little bit more and invest a little bit more. And we can talk a little bit about that later, but that's kind of how it looks like in my room.
Thank you very much for speaking to that direct experience. And similarly, Angie, you were a building leader for a decade at Wright Middle School, and you've now moved into a district-wide role. Where do you see the opportunity for change to help students district-wide thrive?
From where I'm sitting right now, it really hinges a great deal on leadership, and the leadership and how that leader shows up in their schools and in their spaces, and how they interface with their staff and the scholars that are in their schools and their communities. Leadership is important. I've only been in this seat a little bit, and what I'm realizing is that there are a lot of managers, and leaders are also managers, right? But managers are not necessarily leaders. And so I think that's just some work that we will continue to do with our administrators around leadership, right? Again, I'm going back to leadership because in my mind, I look at a school community as a family. And that leader is kind of like the head of the family, right? And so goes how you lead your family is how they will go. And so if I show up sleepy and tired and don't want to do too much, guess what? I'm leading by example, and so my staff will follow me, my scholars will follow me, and not necessarily my parents, but they will see what I'm doing and they will either question it or they will come along. So I think leadership is critical to outcomes in school.
Thank you very much. I remember a boss who told me that learning the difference between leadership and management changed his life. Kaleem, what is one city doing differently? And do you believe it can be replicated elsewhere?
Yeah, what we're doing is so it can be replicated. You know, we don't really compare ourselves to any schools, including Madison, because, you know, in my mind, we're not better than them yet. Our goal is to be the best we can possibly be, though. And second, we don't want to create any cognitive dissonance for people because we don't want them to disagree with what we're doing because we want them to try it. We're doing a lot of things differently. We're following the research and the common sense. We have children that we know come to school underprepared for the experience. And so I tell people we bulk load the support for children early, where we have 2 teachers in every classroom through 2nd grade. We also have the preschool, which the goal is to try to get as many young people into that preschool as possible so that we can see better results for them, both behaviorally, socially, emotionally, and educationally as they move forward. And what we continue to see in the data is that our children who started with us at 2 and 3 years old, black children, there's really not a gap, even if they're really poor. And so we're trying to show people how you bring those 2 together, that you can't have a 4-year-old program that's divorced from your programs that are K through 5. And you also should start earlier than 4-year-olds, not with education, but with definitely child development and support for families. That's the other thing. We are an extension of our children's families. We operate that way. Sometimes parents feel like we're being a little intrusive because of the questions that we ask, but it's like, this is what you signed up for. You know, we have a contract, and it's not a binding contract, but you know, if a child comes to school tired or angry, we ask the question, what was going on? You know, a lot of times we find out that it's mom, usually mom, rushing them out the house to get to work and screaming at them like, come on, you got to go. And with little kids that we serve right now, those things can be unsettling for them. And so just reminding the parent about basic child development and that you know, just don't scream at your kid when they get out the car. You know, if you're running a little behind, that's cool. You know, we just need them to come into school with a smiling face, not a pouty one, because then the teachers have to deal with that the rest of the day. We feed our children well. We have a full-time executive chef with cooks that support our program because we know diet is also a big part of the battle that our children face is either food insecurity, they don't have enough food or the right food to bring to school with them. A lot of families are feeding their children Frosted Flakes. You want your children to be sugar comatose when they come to school and falling asleep at 3rd hour of the day, give them a lot of sugar. And so we also have a no sugar policy at one city. I just had to take a new team member, brought in 3 sodas and some deep dish pizza for the staff. And I had to check the deep dish pizza to make sure there was nothing wrong in it. And then I looked at his sodas and he was like, I'm so sorry, the staff just told me, because I take it and pour it out and throw it out. So there's no candy, there's no soda. We don't use refined sugars, we don't use canned goods at our school. Everything's fair, everything's cooked fresh. We also have an extended school day and extended school year, with only public school in Wisconsin with that. And it's not just because parents can't make it to school after school. It's because we have to take that extra time to build opportunities for our kids. So we have academies. Our children are taking martial arts, dance. They're learning how to swim with the West High swim team. They're learning how to ice skate. They got to have not only experiences, but culture capital in order to participate in Madison, whether our children stay with us or go somewhere else. I never want them to sit in the classroom like I did and somebody ask me, hey, you want to go swimming? And I can't swim, and I have to say no, and everybody else is going. You want me to be distant from that experience? Give me an experience like that. So what we're trying to do is provide them with a holistic experience, but the last thing we're doing is we say we can't get teachers of color in schools. We hire assistant teachers and we teach them exactly the same way. They go through the exact professional development that our teachers go through. I'm one who believes that teacher certification is bankrupt. If teacher certification was so great, then why are we producing 12% reading rates among black children with certified teachers? So there's a need to improve what we're doing there. And rather than separate the experience by those who got a 4-year degree and those who don't, when we know that opportunity is a lot of reasons why they didn't get it, we train them both together. And then right now we're about to launch our Grow Your Own program, because we have people that are ready to teach. So those are the things that we're doing. Our results are better, but they're not great yet.
I might need to take some diet tips from you. That sounds like a great
Dude,
system.
I'm trying, let me lose 20 more pounds.
Kamra, as a classroom teacher, where do you believe the responsibility is for fixing these issues? What can someone like yourself do in your classroom versus what do you need to see from systems and leadership that are in place?
So the responsibility, I think, it's a covered responsibility. I think it has to do with the students, the parents, the schools, the administrators, teachers, downtown people at Doyle. We have city government, state government, federal government. I think everybody has their fair share of responsibility for closing this gap. But specifically, principals. Principals are hands-on, and they're making a lot of decisions right now that really impact our children, right? It's just so crucial. It's just so crucial at this time. You know, things that I'm doing that are things that I would want assistance with, right? From the powers above, you know, class sizes. I think that's one of the things that is major. You know, in my career, when I first started my career, we had this thing called SAGE, and it phased out. But SAGE was actually a good thing because it limited our class sizes with the particular schools, right? At some schools, SAGE was only affecting to like our majority-minority schools. But now SAGE is like gone. And our class sizes have elevated to the same as the schools that are not majority-minority, right? So like, for instance, I have, you know, yesterday I had 19 kids on my 4K roster, right? And so fundamentally, that's a problem, especially when we're pushing this early literacy, right? We already know our children are behind, right? And for some of the reasons I stated before, you know, the literacy deserts and the books per capita per household, and all of these things affect our children when they're coming in, you know. So class sizes, allocations. I say allocations, and it's either the right allocations or the wrong allocations, right? So we could have allocations that could affect something, right? Or we could not have allocations which affect something, right? So like if we had another 4K section, right, I would probably have around 12 as opposed to having 19, right? The 4K model in Madison is to have an assistant in your classroom, right? So just imagine having a classroom of 12, a teacher and assistant, right? Imagine having a reading specialist that can navigate within the 3 classrooms. So each grade would have, per 3 classrooms, you would have a reading specialist that met with the teachers each week. Just imagine if we had library services for our 4K. So like 4K, unfortunately, we don't get the library services that the other grades do because of allocations. Imagine that, right? And you know, our librarians are right now during this time, they're doing a lot more things than just being librarians. They're computer technology people, they're computer hander-outers, computer fixers. They're everything else but what we need, because we need a rush on literacy, early literacy in our districts. So one thing that I would put on my wish list is to be able to have the librarian once a week, so we can lesson plan and do things and bring culturally relevant books into whatever I'm teaching that week. Related arts services for 4K. 4K doesn't get art and music, and we don't get things like that, right? But we need them though, right? All right. So because the kids are coming in already behind, right? So why don't we infuse what we know works, right, for our children? We know it works. All of us on this panel, I'm sure, have teachers that can remember, schools that can remember, that help foster us to where we were going. Madison can be that place. Madison was that place to me. I was fortunate enough for my mother to choose my teachers, so I had wonderful teachers, right? And I can talk about some of them later, but we just need to have great teachers, great schools, and every child needs a good school. Some children need it a little bit more. We need to recognize that. We need to do what we need to do to make that happen. I can go on and on and on, but we really need this. Allocations is serious. Class sizes is serious, and I can talk a little bit more about it, but the retention and retainment of African American teachers, serious, right? So these things are things that I need personally that could help foster the development of what I'm trying to do in my classroom.
Do any of the other panelists have thoughts on where the responsibility for these issues lies and where we should be looking?
I do agree with Kamara. The responsibility lies in all of us. Right? There is the scholar is at the center, the family, there's the school, and then there's the community. And they all have to be connected, and they all have a role in it. And not just the community in which they come out of, the neighborhood community, but I'm talking about the city of Madison community, the state community, the federal, all of that, because it's our responsibility to educate young people, right? And that's our role. Amongst other things than just education, it's our responsibility. So if we don't address those things appropriate at the level that needs to be, it's going to be more of a challenge to change. Resources are always a part of it. And when I was listening to Kamara talk about the things that he wanted or didn't have, I'm going to take it back to, I'm new to this role. And I'm learning how to shift from one system of a school to a larger system of a district. And it's very different. And I'm going to be honest and say, when I was a teacher, I talked about the principals. When I was a principal, I talked about central office. And now that I'm in central office, I have a whole different understanding of the function and operations. And so a part of me now in my role is helping principals to understand the system, right? Because I'm connected to them. And if my leadership means anything, I need to help them to understand, provide them opportunities to learn and grow so that they can help their teachers to understand better and their families to understand better, because what they only see is a small sliver. The teachers are only seeing a small sliver of a larger system. And we have to put our dollars where and the things that we value, right? And if we believe in something, we need to invest in it. Early literacy and beyond is an initiative. Again, the data in MMSD hasn't changed in years. It's probably almost the same when I started back a long time ago. However, we also need to help people make a shift around what it means, what humanity is, right, and how we show up in that space, right? How we show up with our hearts. How do we care about kids? Is this just a job, or is this a passion? Is this a part of your DNA? Are you invested? We need to explore those and have those conversations, because the truth of the matter is that there are young people who are depending on us for a lot, right? And we have to show up and be as present to them as we would be to our own families, our friends' families, our own children, because they need us. And it's our responsibility to, when we talk about in loco parentis, standing in the gap for parents, right? That don't mean standing in the gap however we want to, or halfway, or if we feel like it or not, because they are our responsibility. And so there are a lot of places and a lot of ways in which we need to focus and be intentional on our service, because we're serving kids and families, right? So my role is to center scholars in schools and families and make sure that I am doing the things necessary to support not just one school, but all of the schools, and so that all kids have the appropriate access that they need in order to thrive, not just survive. So there are many layers, many levels, many roads, but we have to show up as our full selves and be present in all spaces.
So you use the term responsibility, and again, you know, I'm kind of a wordsmith. I would flip it and talk about where's the accountability. And right now, the accountability is falling on the most vulnerable part of the system, the kids. And then sometimes we level up to their parents, and then sometimes to their teachers. But think about where they are in the overall picture. And I've had the incredible advantage of seeing schools on 6 of the 7 continents. And I've seen accountability very different in Scandinavia, where everybody feels, oh no, we can't let this happen. We have to do these things for the children, because the children are our citizens who will sustain our nation. We don't have that viewpoint. We have the viewpoint that our children belong to neighborhoods, and if you're in a good neighborhood, then good for you, because you're going to get good services. But if you're in a neighborhood that's not so good, too bad. So we don't have that viewpoint, and I was thinking of, was probably a crude analog. If you were in the hospital and something happened that you didn't like, you're not trying to sue a nurse, even though the nurse has brought you point of service. You probably spent more time with the nurse than anybody else. You're not trying to sue yourself, saying, you know, I'm the patient and I didn't get well, or I didn't get what I needed. You're probably not even going to try to do the doctor. You may level up to the hospital administrator. In other words, the system, and then there'll be a conversation about things like your health care, right? And the insurers. But we do the opposite in schools. We turn it all the way down to that 8-year-old and begin to talk about what's wrong with that 8-year-old and that 8-year-old's mother. We have got to have a viewpoint that we are preserving ourselves as a nation by serving these students well. And the last thing I'll say is, I've said for years that Madison is a city, and this area is a city that is asset rich and access poor. We have every asset you could ask for, from a symphony orchestra. I mean, you name it, and people say, oh, we have this in our city. You could sit around and say, oh, we have that in Madison. We have that. But who gets access to that is the issue. And I was listening to Kamara talk about class size and allocation. But I'm going to tell you this, and I haven't even seen it but in recent years, but I bet you could go to one of our high schools, to the Latin 3 class, and you will find somewhere between 7 and 8 students in there with a fully certified teacher and a full classroom. The actual space is could accommodate 30. So these 7 students have access to a great asset. And yet the 19 children who were squeezed in this class who developmentally, and I think most of the preschool literature suggests that you need a 5-to-1 ratio with kids under 5 years old. 1 adult for every 5 kids. There should be 4 people in that room with them, 4 adults. But we haven't worked on that because we haven't decided that the accountability ought to go in the other direction.
Thank you. With that, we'll take a short break.
We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey and Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and EPIC. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.
Welcome back to the discussion about Madison education. And Kaleem, I believe you wanted to speak to the accountability of the system, to take a lesson from Dr. Ladson-Billings.
Yeah, you know, I was having this conversation with my staff the other day because it's the thing that I live in frustration in education because we're all living the big lie. And leaders in education are somehow expected to toe the line on the lie. And the lie looks like this. Number one, we don't have enough teachers in education. And I was explaining earlier, when you look at the numbers of students who are going into the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is our state's largest school of education, they have 1,000 students enrolled in the School of Ed. But in terms of those enrolled in education, but those enrolled in teacher education, it's a quarter of that, a little bit more. For black students, I counted 3 black students from freshman year to senior year who were getting teaching degrees, but yet we're trying to hire and we're trying to develop more teachers of color, and we're all going after those same 3 black teachers. But we don't talk about it. And we don't talk about the fact that the per pupil amount that we're getting every year doesn't necessarily cover the cost of upgrading our facilities. So we have to go to referendums, right? But we also don't have enough funding to fund the leadership development of our leaders. Angie was just talking about the difference between management and leadership. You get a job as a principal based on whether or not you can manage a school pretty well, or a classroom, right? And then you go into a leadership role and there's nobody necessarily talking to you about how do you get your staff to do things that they don't want to do? How do you address issues within your school environment when there's trauma in the school? How do you deal with angry parents, you know, who want to bypass you and go right to the administration? They're not getting at those things. And then how do you deploy your teachers in a way where it's literally you're focusing them on the areas of need, not the areas where they want to be? And how do you accomplish that with the teachers union and other stakeholders that might weigh in on that? Those are all leader decisions. But we don't talk about that because there's not enough resources. There's never been deployed in education to address things like that. And then the opportunities, we talk about opportunity gap. Those opportunities are within school and out of school, and we don't even have enough money to fund the programs in school. There's no significant after-school activities for kids anymore. There's no serious recreational opportunities that are organized and specialized for kids. Kids have to pay for programs like that now. Sports, you got AAU has taken over, Amateur Athletic Union Sports has taken over those types of activities in school programs in schools. Or if they have programs, they don't have uniforms. You know, so it's like we're sitting here talking about how great certain schools are and how great other schools are not, but we're not talking about the resources that are needed in order to make that happen. And so for me, the big lie is that we're all pretending that somehow if we just got those test scores up, things would be better, and something's wrong with the school board, something's wrong with the teachers, something's wrong with the principals. To me, something's wrong with the community, because this community does not, and I'm going to say it, is not serious about educating its children. We've got problems we've been shaking sticks at for a long time, but they will not deploy the resources necessary to do it. And lastly, I'll say this, another thing is the mindset. Madison is great. I've got a lot of people who support one city, our schools. But I also know that when we were proposing Madison Prep, I was just talking to Captain Mike Hansen of the South Precinct today, Madison Police Department. He said, Kaleem, I don't know how as a white guy I can get across to people that all the emails that come across my desk about the shootings and things like that, they're all black males, most of them between the ages of 15 and 19. And I'm sitting here and then we were talking about the irony of the alternative school you all are trying to develop and put at Hoyt. But those same people who will say, we will support your program, we're gonna give you money, but don't bring those kids to my neighborhood. That's the Madison mindset. We want to feel like we're doing something, but we don't want that something to bump me off or to push me or to take away my resources or my comfort. And all of those things are undermining what we're trying to do for kids.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I think you spoke to the focus that ends up being on, you all have spoken to the focus that ends up being on test scores and things like that. And one thing I think about when we talk about the variety of community investment that's needed in kids is how do we then measure whether we're successful? Gloria, do you have thoughts on how we should measure whether we're successful as a community?
So there's an inverse relationship between the quality of the school and the amount of testing that you do. If you go out to some place like Madison Country Day, they're not testing those kids each and every day. Most of the private schools don't do a lot of testing. Most of our international peers who are better, quote, than us, don't do a lot of testing. There's hardly any testing in Finland. They take the test so that they can be in the table. So what's different is that these are places that hire professionals that they know how to get the job done, and they let them do it. That's right. We hire whoever comes in with a piece of paper that says they're certified, and then we micromanage them to the point where the thing they think they have to do is raise test scores. The tests that we use are very crude and blunt instruments. It's the notion of the only tool you have is a hammer, everything you see is a nail. And that's how we're treating our kids. The arc of our students' school careers cannot be just measured at the end of 9 to 10 months. Some of our kids developmentally may be at a place in kindergarten that doesn't look like they're headed for success, say, in first grade, but then you find that kid in third and fourth grade soaring. I think anybody who's raised children know that there's a very uneven developmental and maturation process. So we have to have people who understand child and adolescent development. We have to have people who understand curriculum and allow curriculum to drive what it is that we're trying to accomplish in the classroom. And then we have to be willing to have a more robust take on what constitutes success. If you've gone from the kid who started out in elementary school who could never get there on time, to a middle schooler who is there on time and present, to a high schooler who is now not only there on time, present, but is taking on leadership, I'm gonna call that success. I'm not gonna worry about just what's on that test score, because the test score is not as predictive of what kids know and are able to do as we like to think they are. And I tell people all the time, I'm not an anti-test person. I think the tests tell us something. I just don't think they tell us everything. And if you're going to rely solely on tests as the be-all, end-all, then the best drivers in our society are 16 years old. And we all know those people can't drive. but they pass the test. So we have to be able to use them in a much more, as a tool for instruction, rather than a stick to keep beating people up and telling them what they can't do.
Tamara, in your classroom, how do you find testing works? What is its value or lack of value for you as a teacher?
Well, once again, I think it depends on, so I teach everything from 3K essentially to third grade. And I think at times the third graders are like over-tested in the fourth graders. I think I was figuring it out. The kids we almost test the kids like a month and a half out of the year. Like literally, you know what I mean? So if we're testing 6-7 weeks, you know, and then we only have 29 weeks, you know, to work with, as opposed to if we were only testing a week or two, right? Then we would have 34 weeks to work, right? So then we're almost have open up an extra quarter of learning just based off of that, right? So I do think that, you know, having consistent running records, testing like on the flow, on the go, is very important and essential for teachers. We need to know where our children are at all times, right? Because we're taking them, like my model is to take them from wherever they are and take them as far as I can in that 180 days without any limitations of the walls or any curriculum, you know, holding me back. And that's why I said earlier, when I was teaching third grade, some of the kids I was actually teaching fifth grade material, but at the other end of the spectrum, I was teaching first grade because I was differentiating, trying to catch up. So the tests, I think, are essential. I think that we, as MMSD, I think we do over-test a little bit. I wish we could tweak that down some, especially in the scenarios where we have kids testing for 6 and 7 weeks out of the 30, you know what I mean? That's, to me, that's just absurd, you know, just over-testing. But on the other end, those running records are so essential. Like a good teacher is going to be testing on the go daily. Like today I was, okay, well, she knows how to write a B. She knows that sound that a B makes, right? I was able to confirm that. Or he's struggling counting to 7. He skipped 6, right? So I'm constantly writing down running records and notes as I'm going, as I'm observing, so I can go back, think about it, and how am I going to adjust my lessons because my job is to take them as far as I can, but it's also to fill all of these holes that either the society has brought to the child or further past learning. You know, lots of, you know, this literacy deserts that are all around the south side of, you know, so all of these things, you know, contribute to that, you know. To answer your question, I think that there are situations where we test too much, but then other situations, I think that we need to do more running record testing. Teachers need to put that into what they do. You know, it has to be a constant revolving wheel in order for us to get, you know, I mean, those early years, and I keep going back to those early literacy years, we have to infuse that in there, right? You have to infuse it in the system. Those first, that from 4K, and I'll even say from 3K to second, those kids are learning to read, right? Third grade through 12th, they're using reading to learn, right? So from 3rd to 12 is all based off of what you've accomplished from 4K, 3K to 2, as far as how easily the acquisition is going to become to you as far as reading, right? It means everything, you know, at that age, you know, so.
Angie, as a former building principal and now at the district level, I mean, how did you measure success, and what will you be encouraging principals now to look at as they try to measure success?
So there has to be a balance, right? And I think formative assessment is critical. That's what Conrad was talking about, being able to take data and collect data and be intentional and focused around what kids you want scholars to know and be able to do. And then constantly reflecting and adjusting and pushing in and pulling out up and having the curriculum and where they are driving your next steps for instruction. But at the same time, again, statewide data, federal data, I mean, testing is just one data point, right? And we shouldn't be spending all of our time on that. What we should be thinking about is what are the standards and how are we teaching those? And what does that mean? And how are we going to ensure that all scholars have access to that? And really being intentional, working collaboratively as a team communicating around, the school. What are our goals for our scholars? How are we going to meet them? And really working as a school community in order to build that strong culture around that. Again, like Dr. Billings said, it's not just that, it's also looking at the growth and where they are. I've dealt with many scholars who came in one way in 6th grade, but when they left at 8th grade, they had matured, some from where they came in. And will have a lot of growth to do still in high school, but we can't discount any of that. And so it's all about looking at all of the pieces and making sure they're all connected, right? And not just doing these things in isolation. And as we know, federal and state testing and all of those things are also, driven by politics and funding. And so it's kind of like, you got to do it, because if you don't, you're not going to get funding. So let's not play around with that either. And on the other side of that too, I also think, because I hear a lot about, the tests are racist, which they are. But the reality is that it is my responsibility too to help young people know how to navigate this system of life that they're going to have to understand, right? I would be derelict in my responsibility to think that they don't have to and not prepare them for that. So there's that piece as well. So the data, the ongoing testing, the understanding the curriculum, the standards, and just, looking at who they are as people and making sure that they are not only college, career, and community ready, but that they are community ready first. Because if they're community ready, they will be college and career ready by default. And that's where they come from. So we're valuing and centering those, who they are, coming in the door. And not saying, oh, well, okay, let's look at that in the end. No, let's look at that day one. So there are a lot of different ways to measure success. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Kaleem, how at One City are you looking at success? And to sort of expand on that, how do you think MMSD and One City can work together going forward for Madison's sake?
So I want MMSD to let me start their school innovation office. Literally, I've been pushing that since Jen Cheatham was here, before that with Dan Nearad. Only reason why I pursued Madison Prep is because he wouldn't let me do it. The system, let me start there first. I was on the panel that advised the U.S. Congress on No Child Left Behind, and Obama's administration, when Arnie Duncan was there, appointed me to as one of the experts for his Race to the Top initiative when it kicked off. And it was all about, at first, how do we help state offices of education re-engineer themselves? And I had Georgia, Utah, and Florida as my states, and I became responsible for my team for those states. And one of the things we were trying to get at with that program was, in order to change education, you got to change every level of the system and how it operates. But what only one system that I saw brought to the table, which was Florida, but then poorly implemented it, was we're going to set up the new Department of Education. And we're going to research that new Department of Education with all the right people. The problem was they didn't resource it on the ground locally. And we were going to take this money, this $500 million, they proposed $1 billion. I think they got $750 million to set this up so that then we could start to support this new system of education. MMSD and all these districts believe that those large Titanics, they can change the system by implementing a new curriculum system-wide. They can implement a new professional development program system-wide. It cannot be done. I've not seen it done yet. No one has. So I would propose MMSD take a slice of their school district, create a new school district within it, prepare, like, how to behave like that, where you've got 3 elementary schools, maybe 1 to 2 middle schools and 1 high school. And you take you take some of the best people that you've got, and you work with them to create the new schools that you need for your system. And then you resource that through referendums and things like that, so you don't have to rob other schools of that. So, but that's a way we could work together. Other ways we can work together, anything they want to know or do with us, we're open to talking about doing. literally. And Carlton Jenkins and I've had some great conversations about reading and things like that. He's got a much deeper challenge than I do because he's got the Titanic. I got the little frigate, the little speedboat on the side that gets to do things a little bit quicker. So that's one way for us to work together, is let us be that little speedboat for you. And I'll help you build yours. So then I don't have to build more schools. I've told people we'll only build more schools at one city if y'all don't do it. That's the challenge to our peers. The second thing is, and what was the first part of your question?
How
Assessment.
you all measure success.
So I hate tests. I do. I was good at them in school. That was the only reason why I did okay in high school, because I skipped so many classes, but I was good at taking tests. But they don't tell us a whole lot. When I was at the Department of Public Instruction in the late 90s, we were looking at the high school graduation exam, and math is my strength area, so I was on the math committee, and we were selecting test items with McGraw-Hill. And someone, I can't remember who it was, asked the perfect question. How many of these things that we're selecting are going to be on the test? Because there's not a lot here out of our state standards. And the lady who was a psychometrician stood up, and others were with her, said, you know, actually on these types of summative assessments, even formative, even these interim assessments that we do like the MAP, we can only test about 30% of your state standards. That's what they looked at when they looked at the alignment study between the test and the standards. So what makes education fun and exciting for the teachers and the kids is the other 70%. So we literally have boiled down our education system to 30% of what we say in those books kids should know and be able to do. Parents aren't looking at that. Parents are driving teachers crazy. My kid's test score, because we prepared them and trained them that way. Your kid's test score, your kid, okay, they got a good test, but they don't know nothing about nothing. You know, they just have a good test score. You know that. You see all these young people. We've hired some at one city. I did this. I got a 4.0 in my college education, but we had 2 of them just leave our school the first day of school. I don't know if their GPA was that high, but that's how we've seen that, because you're book smart, but you're not culture, people, world smart. And so we're bankrupt in education every day with these tests. But I do think the tests tell us something. I like MAP tests. It gives us an eye into the rudiments, like the big little pieces of reading, the performance objectives. People need to know how these things work. They basically tell you, you look all the way down to the performance objective, can the kid, do they know the sounds of all the major vowels? And can they use them in different forms of sentences, 10 different sentences, and then the test will tell you that. And if a teacher sees that and the kid is only successful in a few vowels and not 5 sentences, you figure out where to address that. That's what the test helps you do. It does not tell you if your child's going to be a great person, a great leader, a great business person. And so for me, I only do the test because parents want it, literally. It's the only reason why we do it. I actually don't care about the state. I actually think we need a revolution in education. I wish I ran MMSD or these other systems, because I would tell them, look, we're not doing that, we're not doing that, we're not doing that, we're not doing that. What you gonna do, shut us down? You're gonna take our money? You deal with the parents. But I am telling you we are going to do this. I even thought about running for state superintendent, and the first thing I was gonna do if I got elected was, we're shutting this place down. We're only allowing essential services, districts getting paid, you know, the poor, terrible teacher certification, things like that being done so we can recreate this thing, because it's a joke, man. It's a joke. And the people aren't the joke. That's the thing. We think there's all these bad teachers. 70% of those teachers in these schools could turn the lights on for our kids if prepared to do so and given the opportunity to do so. There's 20%, they need more. There's 10% of your workforce that always needs to be on the move. We always make mistakes. They make a mistake in applying to be a teacher. We make a mistake in hiring them. But it's a big joke we're living.
Thank you very much for speaking to that. You mentioned just in that answer a bit about reading and the importance of that. And MMSD right now is undertaking a shift in early literacy. Kamra, obviously, you're heavily involved in that as a teacher at the elementary level. What do you think of this shift? Why is it important to spend time on for students?
The shift that the district is making?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so all of the teachers need to be trained to be reading teachers. I agree with that. You know, I agree with that totally. You know, about how we are adjusting into it during this COVID area and everything is going on at the same time, and it's kind of being, pushed and kind of rushed, and to me, good things that are long lasting are not rushed, right? Like if you want a teacher to really invest in what you're doing, you need to trickle it in and guide them and lead them, into where you want them to go. This is called like letters, and at a 4K level, in a kindergarten level, we're studying these, looking at this, and it's almost like taking a college class again. Relearning all of those fundamentals, right? So the assumption is that a lot of us don't know all of those key fundamentals, right? But as a district leads, I guess you can't assume that anybody knows anything. But in my perception, you can assume that the teachers know some of the things, right? But it's kind of like starting at square zero, and and Dr. Billings will know as a professor, that these terms that are coming back to you, sometimes you'll cram study them and you'll know them for the test, right? But then someone asks you next month about how to do it or how to implement it, you're like, I don't, so because it's rushed through, right? It's rushed through, and if we want this to be a really long-lasting thing, so letters, from my outside perspective, because I haven't really dove into it, it looks pretty cool, right? But how we are letting it trickle down on our staff and how we are giving them time to embrace it is important, right? If it's rushed and thrown down our throats, we're not going to be able to be as receptive to it. And when we're not as receptive to it, right, we're not able to give that same instruction to our children. Because at the end of the day, it's for the children, right? So, but we need to go the easiest way to get to them. So I just think that, rolling it out, I think we need to just take sometimes it's good to take a step backward. You take 2 steps forward and you take a step backwards to evaluate. Take a snapshot of the environment. How is it looking, right? Our teachers is a really big asset in Madison, right? So how are they taking in that, as a whole? What are some of the things that they're saying? What are some things that they're needing, right? Because as a teacher, I'm not saying that we don't need it, because I do think that we need it, because we all need to be together, right? But this time of year, during COVID, when we're worried about kids getting on buses and kids getting lost and parents, we're worrying about all of these different factors, especially as a 4K and kindergarten teacher. These kids have not gone to school in the last 2 years, right? So we have first grade students that have never gone to school. No preschool, no 4K, you know what I mean? No 4K, no kindergarten, now they're in first grade. Think about that, right? So, but at the same time, those teachers are thinking like, okay, how can I differentiate? How can I make it their light glow? How can I make every day special? How can I make learning fun, right? Every time that my 4Ks learn something new, I talk to them about how exciting it is, how they feel good about learning. So I make it a big deal about learning, right? But then when the teachers are getting this stuff down their throat and stuff like that, we don't get that same, because we're all human, right? So what's good for one is a lot of times good for another, right? So when you think of the big picture, you have to always just slow down and take a breath of what you're doing and then continue on. But you can't just go straight ahead thinking that whatever I had decided from before is the right thing and I don't care what anybody, that's not gonna work. That's almost like that slave mentality stuff, you know what I mean? You need to slow down, think what you're doing, any mistakes that you've done, you need to try to clear the waters and move forward, So to sum it up, I think the district is going in the right direction with the programs that they've chosen. I just think that they need to slow down on implementing it a little bit to make sure that the teachers can really gain the knowledge of what it is.
Thank you very much. So we do just have a few minutes left, and I want to ask each of you, if you had to pick one initiative or project to fund or expand upon that you think could make the biggest difference in Madison education for children here, what would it be? And I think I'll start at the end and maybe go down the line. So, Kamra, if you
want. I have 2. Can I say 2?
Sure. I'll make an exception.
So like I was saying before, early literacy it means everything. It means everything, right? Where our children are at the end of 2nd grade with reading goes through every subject. It means everything. So making a conscious decision to make a financial decision, like a real financial decision on the 4K through 2. How can we make that look, what is, and Dr. Billings was saying, I think she said 5-to-1 ratio. And she knows exactly what she's talking about. She knows what's best for our children. Now we know that, what are we going to do, right? Because we acted as if we didn't know that, right? No, real. So, and then the other thing is the recruitment and the retainment of African American teachers. It's huge. When I got in this district, there was like a waiting list for teachers. Like you couldn't even get, I think it was like over 400. Like you couldn't get in. You had to wait 4 and 5 years to get it. Now, I think I read the other day that we have like 70 teacher vacancies, right? So just imagine if we took a trip to the SWAC, Southwest Athletic Conference, right, all black conference, and plucked 70 teachers out of there and placed them in Madison, where these 70 teachers are, where we don't have teachers. We have 70 teacher spots that aren't there. We have at least 70 African American men and women down there that would pray and do whatever to get a job. They would love to be here. I know because I was one of them at Jackson State, you know, but I didn't get recruited. I got recruited because my parents were educators in Madison. I didn't see anybody from MSD come down. And now that I've been here, no one has sent me anywhere to help, you know, go bring some of these people. That's why I have my connections in the South, right? So the recruitment and retention of black teachers, I think those two are the most important. They would make the biggest difference, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. Angie?
I think something that would make the biggest difference is just our ability as humans to care about other people and how we show up. I think Dr. Billings was hitting on it like perfectly. Like, as a society of Americans, there are times when I'm really embarrassed and sad about how we care for and support one another as humans. If we can build our capacity around caring and loving and supporting and nurturing that's authentic and meaningful and real, I think then the other things will be able to come because we would be showing love and we'd be moving in humility and service, right? And centering our own selfishness would kind of be put on the back burner. So that's where, for me, would bring the greatest amount of joy and change and just being human.
Thank you. Colleen?
Yeah, for me, it's very simple. I would have people look at one city and public charter schools like us as the R&D for public education, which is what we were intended to be in the first place as charters. We can help us learn our way through this. But as people still think about where they stand on public charter schools and don't realize that if you understood the history of it, you understood that the very people you vote for are the ones that created it, we would be in a better place. So I would love to see us become that R&D system for education in Madison and Dane County.
Thank you. And finally.
So I'm going to be a pragmatist here. Acceleration. If I could only change one thing, I would get rid of all remedial programs, all things that slow kids down, all things that keep them behind, and I would accelerate. Our kids would be leaving high school with college credit, every kid, or with an honors course or an AP course, every single one of them. Because when you set that target out there, our kids can reach these milestones. They, and I, just want to say that, Kaleem's example of talking about experimentation, that's the thing we do poorly. We will not experiment. We just want to, everybody's going to do X. When the truth of the matter is that one city, in many ways, is the existence proof that we need to begin to do some innovative acceleration. And I would accelerate with our babies in pre-K, with our kids that go into 6th grade, and with our 9th graders, because they're all hitting a transition. And so they don't even know what it's supposed to be. So it could be so different. And I just want to remind us, I've been very inspired by the work of Arundhati Roy, who says the pandemic is a portal. This is an opportunity for us to forget about that old world and move into the new world and use it as a way to totally reconfigure and reconstruct this world that we think we want to be living in.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to talk about this today. I think we could probably talk for another hour and a half or the rest of the day, if we're being honest about this. So I just appreciate you all taking the time, and thank you for tuning in.
We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey & Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and EPIC. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.